Thank you very much to everyone for braving the cold and for taking an interest in your community. It's great to see so many people out here for this discussion, and thank you very much to our panel. I know time is tight, so I'm not going to trespass too long. I just want to say a few words as editor of Highways magazine and a representative, I suppose, of the Highways community. I may have united everyone in the hall in hatred against our profession. However, I would just like to say that there are a few misconceptions about the highways industry. Firstly, roads, whether maintained or built, are not for motor vehicles. They're for people. They're for communities. Roads are designed to bring people closer together, not to tear people apart, not to tear communities apart. So any road that does that is not doing its job. We are a critical friend of the highways industry, and the highways industry is well aware of some of the problems which I know will be animating some of your passions here tonight. For instance, induced demand. The knowledge of building more road capacity actually just increases, over and above natural growth, levels of congestion, so that you cannot build yourself out of congestion in the same way you can't dig yourself out of a hole. We're aware of the climate emergency, and many people in the highways industry are very passionate about this. This is why people in the highways industry are working to create clean air zones, low emission zones, to switch the highways industry to a low carbon, more sustainable footing. So please do bear in mind that we are all here to try and solve a problem. And that problem is obviously affecting you and your home. So I know passions will run high, but everyone here has the right to be heard. And it's very rare that you learn something from listening to yourself, I find. So without further ado, I will start off the discussion with Councillor Paulettte Lappin from Sefton Council. 4 minutes, over to you.
Thank you, and thank everybody for turning out on what's a very difficult night. So I'll cut to the quick, because I've got a series of headings really which help to clarify, I think, Sefton Council's position. One is about the impact of emissions from visiting ships and HGVs, and that's the major thing that we're actually looking here, quality and health and the well-being of our local communities. So air quality in the borough, including that impacted on the port-related activities, is reviewed and assessed by Sefton Council on an ongoing basis. Officers use a series of different types of monitoring, 5 automatic monitoring stations and over 100 diffusion tube sites largely across Merseyside. There's an ongoing review and assessment process, and air quality in the majority of the borough has been determined to be within national air quality limits. However, there are 4 localised areas which are defined within the borough, and they're in the south of the borough, where levels of nitrogen dioxide are close to or above the health-based annual average national standards. These areas have been designated as air quality management areas. They are Millers Bridge, Hawthorne Road, South Road and Princes Way. 3 of these hotspots may be impacted by the future increase of port activity, which is Princes Way, Hawthorne Road, Dunningsbridge Road, following through, and Millers Bridge. There are a number of air quality improvement actions that we've been taking, which are already the EcoStars, port booking systems, trying to redesign the road, junctions, traffic light priority optimisation systems, and the hurry-up system for the HGV priority. Sefton has made dealing with poor air quality an absolutely high priority and has developed a multidisciplinary group which has been set up to oversee and direct the council's work. So we've undertaken preliminary work to do with a clean air zone. Liverpool has been designated a clean air zone by the government and has therefore been funded for it. Sefton has not received any funding, but despite the cuts to local government, we have actually decided that we will pursue this. So we're following on with the second stage, which is initially a commitment for over £150,000, which will actually look to develop the second stage of the business case. Because like all government schemes, you can't just put your hand up and say, I want to be a clean air zone. You actually have to devise a whole business plan. You have to be able to develop and demonstrate that you've actually thought it through and how it works effectively. We also recognise the impact of shipping, and we also know that Brexit potentially will have an absolutely huge, it could have a huge impact on the way that shipping actually impacts on this area with the rise of HGV vehicles. It's known what our view is in relation to the proposed road through Rimrose Valley, and we do believe that the tunnel is possible and it is vital, and we actually are still pushing for that, and we will continue to campaign for that. But I have to make it clear that Sefton does not control that road. That road is the responsibilities of Highways England, and we will act as a sensible partner. We will listen, we will try and work very, very hard with Highways England and the Department for Transport to actually make sure that our views are actually heard, and the views of local people, really, because I am a local person. I live on one of those roads. I know what that traffic is about, and so therefore, as a local councillor, we're deeply committed to the health of our local residents. Thank you for listening to me.
I'm going to stay sitting. I've still got PTSD from my wedding speech. So I'm Stu. I'm speaking on behalf of the Save Rimrose Valley campaign. We were born out of the charity Rimrose Valley Friends. And as the name suggests, that was a charity that was formed to promote and protect Rimrose Valley Country Park here in South Sefton. But our campaign is actually about much more than that. It actually addresses a lot of the issues that are being experienced in this part of the borough. It was formed to object to the government's plans to build a road through Rimrose Valley. The title of that project is called the Port of Liverpool Access Scheme. It's being built for the Port of Liverpool. There's no escaping that, despite how it's tried to be spun. Why are we relevant to this debate? Well, the longer the campaign's gone on, the more we've learned. It's not just about protecting our green space, even though that's good enough in its own right in my mind. It's about many of the issues being experienced across the borough, and actually directly linked to the climate crisis as the title of this Q&A. It's also massively political. There's a direct link to what's happening here with this project to the government's national government's infrastructure and transport policies, their environmental policies and their public health policies. And all of these flow down to the Liverpool City region and Sefton Council. It also raises many serious questions about the level of influence that big business can have in our democracy. And by big business, I mean Peel Ports. It's a shame they're not here tonight to talk to us about that. So some of the things that we've learned, starting out as just a park campaign, is about the destruction of species and habitat and our biodiversity. All of these things we know contribute to the climate emergency. We need to be protecting these things, and this road would do the exact opposite. It's about the public's health and well-being, and obviously John and the Church Road Group know all about the impact that HGV traffic and congestion in general can have on people's health and well-being. And it's obviously about the climate crisis. So 26% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions come from transport. Why are we building more roads to facilitate more cars and HGVs at a time of climate crisis? It's about shipping. So one of these super tankers that the Port of Liverpool is itching to welcome equates to the same level of emissions as 50 million diesel cars. Now, that can be disputed or questioned, but that's one of the reports that we've seen. And it's about, as Estelle mentioned, it's about practices like importing wooden pellets from the United States, created from felled virgin forests to be burned in a power station in the UK. That's just about as unsustainable as it gets. And it also occupies a really valuable rail link, which is what we believe freight should be travelling. So just coming back to the central question, the 85036 scheme, in our view, is the perfect example of how not to do infrastructure in the 21st century. And it makes a mockery of the climate emergency declarations of the national government, the Liverpool City region and Sefton Council, and we need non-road sustainable solutions to this problem.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Pass over to Bill Esterson MP.
Thank you very much. I'm against the road. I'm against either option for the road. It's been turned off.
Just go ahead.
All right. I'm against the road. I'm against either option for the road because if we already have a public health emergency, which we do, where 1 in 19 early deaths in our cities and our major towns is as a result of roadside emissions, where life expectancy for people living near the Port of Liverpool is 13 years lower than it is 2 miles away in the same borough of Sefton, then we have a duty to look after the people and not to make it worse. Because if we build more roads, we're just going to add to those roadside emissions. I'm against it for that reason. And I'm against it because there's also an environmental crisis. And that's why we need to protect the brilliant example of a country park that we have at Rimrose Valley. We have species there that need protecting, that need enhancing, because without them, we're in all sorts of trouble. I don't know if you saw a report recently, we're not seeing as many insects splattering against our windscreens because there aren't as many insects. And those insects have an incredibly important role to play in our biodiversity. And they are the early signs of what is going wrong. We all know about the shortage of bees, similarly. And we have to protect habitats. And there is, of course, a climate crisis. And at the moment in this country, we are on target, if that's the right word, to reach net zero, not in the 2050 that the government says is its plan, but in 2099. And certainly not the 2030 that we probably should be trying to achieve. So those are reasons alone, they are reasons collectively why we shouldn't be building more roads. We should be looking at rail freight, we should be looking at the low carbon options. I completely accept why Sefton were calling for a tunnel, and I've gone along with that call, but actually I'd prefer it to be a rail tunnel and to get our freight onto railways. So if we're going to have HS2 and that massive £106 billion investment that Boris Johnson or Dominic Cummings, whichever of them, one of it really is in charge, is proposing, it can only work with the added investment of rail freight from the Port of Liverpool and the whole of the Transport for the North plans as well. And we must make the most of the opportunities in this city region that there are, in wind that we see. And look, the private sector is actually showing the way, if we want to look, because Ørsted, all right, it's majority owned by the Danish government, but it's a private firm who now are entirely renewable energy with their wind farm off at Burbo Bank. Yeah, so that's an example of what can be done. It's exactly where we should be going, and we should be encouraging the private sector down that road. And that's the kind of approach that needs government intervention, it needs government setting the policy, it needs government at national level, at local level, both playing their part. So that's the agenda that I want to set. That is the scale of ambition that I think we all have to get behind, and that means no to these roads. And by the way, just a final thought on shipping. The shipping industry has committed to halving its emissions by 2050, not getting rid of them. At least aviation's gone for net zero by 2050. And shipping is one of the big problems. And by the way, shipping and air freight are not included in government figures when they say that the target is 2050. So we've got an enormous amount of work to do. We still need economic investment. We still need economic growth. We've got to, thank you, we've got to demonstrate to people that there are decent jobs to be had in decarbonising the economy, to take people with us as well. But that comes with an enormous amount of work. And it starts with taking the right action at a local level, and that's why I'm supporting Stuart and the brilliant work done by the Friends of Rimrose. I'm supporting what the council is trying to do, and I'm interested to hear what the other panellists have to say. Thank you very much.
John, can I pass over to you next, and Craig, I'll let you sum up with a wider perspective.
Good evening, everybody. I'm with the Church Road and Districts Residents Association, which essentially began for the protection of the people on the A5036 Church Road. Very, very quickly, we turned into something a bit bigger because we began as Church Road News, and then we discovered some of the anomalies in the entire system that goes along with this debacle that happens around here. Stuff like an environmental health office which lost 70% of its staff. We find the environmental health office working to 1995 guidelines, despite the fact that they were revised in 2007 and altered by High Court judgments in 2015, 16 and 17. There has been absolutely no movement or discussion with the public about these anomalies. So we're absolutely determined to look after the communities that we consider we can help. As it turns out, we've grown now to the Districts Residents Association, where we're campaigning and arguing with various members of the council, councillors and the Labour Party for people from Millers Bridge to Switch Island. So whilst we are essentially began as Church Road, we are concerned mainly with the entire port facility from Millers Bridge to Switch Island. There are 6 schools in the direct fallout zone of the pollution from this road and this port. None of those schools, absolutely none of those schools, have any digital monitoring to look after what happens during the day. None of them. They've been offered that they can have a diffusion tube, but they can't have digital monitoring. Why this is important is a diffusion tube will give monitoring over a 168-hour week, and it will give an average over a 168-hour week. The children are in those schools between 8 and 3:30 in the afternoon, which is the highest concentration of toxins in the entire week. So if you added up all the hours that the kids are in school, but the emissions that apply to those hours, you will take your kids out of the schools. We've got the likes of St Philip's School, which has got a playground 8 metres from the tarmac of the main road, which is continually gridlocked day after day after day for up to 4 hours in the times when those children are at school. We want to protect that. We've also discovered that Millers Bridge, where the council are considering putting another tarmac plant on the port, is actually the 5th highest concentration of cancers in the entire nation. The 5th highest in the nation is here in Sefton. Okay? So we just have to, that's what we're looking at. That's where we are. We are fighting on every corner, and we will be meeting with Client Earth in in April, and we will, cast iron guarantee, take Sefton Council to court for its failings.
And let me say how pleased I am to be up here in Liverpool for this. I've been to Liverpool several times over the last few years in my role as Chief Executive of Friends of the Earth, and it was a couple of years when I came here, and a group of residents from Rimrose presented with me a picture of that map, of the Highways England map, of the scheme of the road cutting through Rimrose Valley. And as soon as I saw that map, I found it so shocking, I knew I wanted to come and find out more about the campaign. And I visited last April, and Stuart and others took me around, and I met local residents in Rimrose Valley, and was really shocked to see what Highways England was planning. That they would cut through the middle of this community, that they would destroy this wonderful urban green space, this space being used by school children, both for their playing outside, but even to walk across it just to get to school. And it strikes me as such an appalling plan. It has to be stopped. But that's kind of obvious. That's a sort of visceral reaction. And I see a lot of these kind of schemes across the country, and I think the plans for Rimrose Valley are particularly shocking. But then you sit back and actually think about what's involved here. We know that there will be that huge impact on the environment. We've heard from other people here tonight about that. But also that impact on people's health. You know, air pollution is responsible for the premature deaths of 40,000 people in this country every single year. Those are the government's own statistics. And we know that urban green space is very important for people's health, and losing it really impacts people's health as well. So we've been waiting, haven't we, for the start of the statutory consultation here, been waiting for Highways England to produce that environmental assessment involved in the plans for Rimrose Valley Road. But I think we need a health assessment as well here. Actually, what are the full assessments of building this road through Rimrose Valley? What's the real impact going to be on the community's health here? What's the extra costs to the NHS locally from building a road through Rimrose Valley? But we've heard also from John tonight about, you know, the appalling impact that traffic is already having on Church Road as well. And of course it would be entirely wrong also to widen Church Road there to try and accommodate this extra HGV freight as well from the port. So you have to ask yourself, why is it that these communities only being presented with these essentially two options? And what I see travelling around the country time and again, it happens in communities time and again, it's an old tactic of Highways England, is to try and trade off one community against the other, try and pit one community against the other from one bad road scheme to another bad road scheme. You have to ask, why is it we're only ever presented by bad road schemes rather than looking more holistically at the options? And I'll tell you why. It's because of the structure of our public bodies. Think about it. Highways England, it's a public body and it's set up to do one thing. Think about, design, propose new roads and manage those roads. If you set up a public body to design, create and build and service new roads, guess what? It will do one thing. It will propose and design and build new roads. We need to scrap Highways England for a start. We need to end this. It's a public body that is not fit for purpose in the 21st century. We need to replace it with a new public body that will look at sustainable transport in and around and come up with true sustainable solutions to our transport problems, so that they can look beyond just roads, but look at all the options. But secondly, we need to also think bigger about and ask really serious questions. Why wasn't this solved even before the proposals were put to expand the Port of Liverpool? Why weren't the answers to this figured out before the port was expanded, rather than the port being expanded and then this problem being presented as a fait accompli and something that has to be solved after the effect? And why is it time and again the onus is put on local communities to come up with the solutions? When you put all this together, you find yourself thinking, why is it that they see a bit of green space on a map and think, what a lovely place to put a road? Why is it it's the communities that are asked to come up with the alternatives? Why is it that we keep thinking expanding ports and sending ever more stuff around the world is somehow good in a climate emergency, when we know that 50% of the carbon emissions that all are associated with all our lives come not from emissions in this country, but with the goods we consume and the emissions associated with their manufacture abroad? These are the big questions we need to ask. We need a fundamental rethink, and it's not going to be solved by a simple consultation from Highways England on two road options. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody. That was a collection of very passionate and eloquent speeches. So.